let us talk about input tax credit. What is input tax credit, and also what is the rule of input tax credit? Under the GST rules 66 given some other rule and regulations for maintaining the input tax credit. Before that we are going input tax credit. So we identify what is the meaning of input credit. The input credit means at the time of paying tax on output, you can reduce the tax you have already paid on inputs. You can claim input credit of some other amount. So it simply says about the examples of this input credit is the input credit of rupees 300 and you only need to deposit rupees 150 in tax. So what is the maximum amount you can pay the tax is already you are take input credit as 300. Now this value of 150 means the less the balance amount for need to deposit in taxes. The input credit mechanism is available to you when you are covered under the GST Act. Also, who is an input service distributor under the GST? An input service distributor is a business which receives invoices for services used by its branches. It distributes the tax paid to such branches on a proportional basis by issuing an ISD invoice. ISD means input service distributors. So that inputs tax section 2 under section 62 of GST. The input tax in relation to a registered person means the central tax, state tax, integrated tax or union territory tax charged on any supply of goods or services are both made to him and includes. So some other the examples of input tax. The tax payable under section 9 subsection 3 and also 9 subsection 4 is mentioned the input tax. The tax payable under section 5 subsection 3, also 5 subsection 4 of the Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act. The tax payable under section 9 subsection 3, 9 subsection 4 of the respective State Goods and Service Tax Act, or the tax payable under section 7 subsection 3, also 7 subsection 4 of the Union Territory Goods and Service Tax Act, but does not include the tax paid under the compositions levy. These are the under sections mentioned in the GST Act. So what is integrated goods? Mention the input. And what are the state goods? GST mention the input tax. And also union territory mention the input tax sections. The input tax credit under section 2 subsection 63, input tax credit means the credit of input tax. What is an integrated tax? Under section 2 subsection 58, integrated tax means the integrated goods and services tax levied under the Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act. And what is a state tax? Under section 2 subsection 104, state tax means the tax levied under any state goods and service tax act. So already you know what is the GST. Types of GST is CGST, SGST, IGST. CGST means central GST. SGST means state GST. And IGST means integrated GST. And also union territory tax. What is the union territory tax is under section 2 subsection 115. Union territory tax means the Union territory goods and services tax levied under the Union Territory Goods and Service Tax Acts. So these are the three types of tax systems in GST. And we identified who is eligible to take input tax credit. So this input tax credit also called as a ITC. I for input, T for tax, C for credit. So that is called as input tax credit or ITC. You know one of the industries of ITC? Indian Tobacco Corporations, already known to ITC, that is a cigarette companies, and also introduced most of the food and beverages. Not only beverages, food items are introduced by the ITC systems. The diversification of business strategies they adapted to introduce the food item of ITC. So GST mentioned ITC means input tax credit. Section 16, subsection 1, every registered person shall, subject to such conditions and restrictions as may be prescribed and in the manner specified in section 44(9), be entitled to take credit of input tax charged on any supply of goods or services or both to him, which are used or intended to be used in the course of furtherance of his business, and the said amount shall be credited to the electronic credit ledger of such persons. And next one is, what is the eligibility of input tax credit on inputs in stock for a person who obtains voluntarily registrations? The person who obtains voluntary registration is entitled to take the input tax credit of input tax on inputs in stock, inputs in semi-finished goods and finished goods in stock, held on the day immediately preceding the date of registrations. So that is the eligibility of input tax credit. And examples of Mr. B applies for a voluntary registration on 5th June 2017 and obtained registration on 22nd June 2017. Mr. B is eligible for input tax credit on inputs in stock as on what dates? So 5th June 2017 he registered, and 22nd June 2017 is obtained registrations. So Mr. B is eligible for input tax credit on inputs held in stock and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock as on 21st June 2017. So Mr. B cannot take input tax credit in respect of capital goods. And allowability of input tax credit when the tax components was added to the cost of assets. Section 16, subsection 3, when the registered person has claimed depreciation on the tax component of the cost of capital goods and plant and machinery under the provisions of the Income Tax Act 1961. The input tax credit on the said tax components shall not be allowed in the GST. What is time limit to avail input tax based on debit note? Already we mentioned some other thing. What is debit note and what are the credit note? Section 16, subsection 4, a registered person shall not be entitled to take input tax credit in respect of any invoice or debit note for supply of goods or services or both after the due date of furnishing of the return under section 39 for the month of September following the end of financial year to which such invoice or invoice relating to such debit note pertains, or the due date of furnishing of the relevant annual return, whichever is earlier. What is the ITC entitlement of a newly registered person? A person applying for registration can take input tax credit of inputs held in stock and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock on the day immediately preceding the date of grant of registration. If the person was liable to take registration and he has applied for registration within 30 days from the date on which he became liable to registration, then input tax credit of inputs held in stock and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock on the day immediately preceding the date on which he became liable to pay tax can be taken. So some other examples of input tax system means before you are involving the buying activities, at the time of you pay tax. After the finished goods you can make selling what the initial give the amount, that amount which reduced by the payment of GSTs. So that is called as the input tax systems. And happens to ITC in case the change of constitutions registered persons, some other item mention the GST. A person becomes liable to pay tax on 1st August 2017 and has obtained registration on 15th August 2017. Such person is eligible for input tax credit on inputs held in stock as on 1st August 2017 or 31st July 2017, 15th August 2017. He cannot take credit for the past periods. He is eligible for input tax credit on inputs held in stock as on 31st July 2017. They are mentioned some other dates and year for taking the GST inputs. What is the treatment for inputs held in stock contained in finished goods? So this semi-finished called as SFG. S means semi, F means finished goods. And FG is finished goods in case of newly registered persons. It is mentioned only newly registered persons who are new registered the business. This comes under this treatment for inputs. Section 18 subsection 1, a person who has applied for registration under this act within 30 days from the date on which he becomes liable to registration and has been granted such registration shall be entitled to take credit of inputs tax in respect of inputs held in stock and inputs continued in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock on the day immediately preceding the date from which he becomes liable to pay tax under the provision of this act. This 18 subsection 1 mentioned the input held on stock treatment of inputs. Also, section 8 subsection 2 mentioned a person who takes registration under section 25 subsection 3 shall be entitled to take credit of input tax in respect of inputs held in stock and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock on the day immediately preceding the date of grant of registration by registrations office. And what happens to ITC in case of exempt supply of goods and services? ITC means input tax credit, or both by a registered person becomes a taxable supply. When an exempt supply of goods or services or both by a registered person become a taxable supply, such person shall be entitled to take credit of inputs tax in respect of inputs held in stock and inputs contained in semi-finished or finished goods held in stock relatable to such exempt supply and on capital goods exclusively used for such exempt supply on the day immediately preceding the date for which such supply becomes taxable. This taxable system of ITC mentioned the exempt of supply of goods and services. Note of this under section 2 subsection 47, exempt supply means supply of any goods or services or both which attracts nil rate of tax or which may be wholly exempt from under section 11 of tax or under section 6 of the Integrated Goods and Service Tax Act and includes non-taxable supply. The credit on capital goods shall be reduced by such percentage points as may be prescribed of the tax systems. And what happens to ITC in case there is a change in constitution of registered persons? Tax treatment of ITC in case of dealer and registered person was paying under the composition schemes up to 30th July. And what is the limited for availing such ITC? And what is the limit for taking ITC? And what are the ITC goods, business or personal purpose? Or ITC where goods have been delivered to a person? Or what is happened of ITC in case of goods used both of taxable goods and non-taxable goods? And also banking company or financial institutions, registered taxable person claimed depreciations and information technology business and destroyed or lost due of variation reasons or with goods and service used for construction of the business purpose. These all are the can eligible to tax credit systems or input tax credits. So what are the goods on which ITC is not allowable? These all are the items mentioned in the allowable of taken of input tax credit. Some are not allowable. Which one is not allowable is this section 17 subsection 5, input tax credit shall not be available in respect of the following, namely number 1, motor vehicles and other conveyances. These motor vehicles for making the following taxable supplies, namely further supply of such vehicles or conveyance or transportations of passengers or imparting training on driving, flying, navigating such vehicles or convenience for transportation of goods. These motor vehicles comes under the not allowable of input tax credit. Next, the following supply of goods or services are both food and beverages, membership of a club, health and fitness centers, rent a cab, life insurance and health insurance. This health insurance cab except the government notice the service which are obligatory for an employer to provide to its employees under any law for the time being in force, such as inward supply of goods and services, and travel benefits extended to employees on vacations such as leave or home travel concessions. Works contract services. Goods or services are both received by a taxable person for construction of an immovable property. Goods or services are both on which tax has been paid under section 10. Goods or services are both received by a non-resident taxable person except on goods imported by him. Goods or services are both used for personal consumptions. Goods lost, stolen, destroyed, written off or disposal of by way of gift or free samples, and any tax paid in accordance with the provisions of section 74, 129 and 130. These all are the goods on which ITC is not allowable. The expression construction includes reconstructions or renovations or additions or alterations or repairs to the extent of capitalizations to the said immovable properties called as a construction purpose. So these all are these not allowable for input tax systems. This ITC included works contract or job work or electronics commerce. Already we discussed about job work and electronics commerce previous chapters. Now discuss about only works contract. The works contract means a contract for building, construction, fabrications, completion, erection, installation, fitting out, improvement, modification, repair, maintenance, renovation, alteration or commissioning of any immovable property, wherein transfer of property in goods, whether as goods or in some other form, is involved in the execution of such contract. This works contract GST Act under section 2 subsection 119 mentioned the works contract. What are the conditions for taking ITC? So some other mentioned the conditions for taking ITC. These are section 16 subsection 2 mentioned no registered person shall be entitled to the credit of any input tax in respect of any supply of goods or services or both to him unless he is in possession of a tax invoice or debit note issued by a supplier registered under this act or such other tax paying documents as may be prescribed, and he has received the goods or services or both, it shall be deemed that the registered person has received the goods where the goods are delivered by the supplier to a recipient or any other persons on the direction of such registered person, whether acting as an agent or otherwise, before or during movement of goods, either by way of transfer of documents of little goods or other sizes, or mention the title of the goods. Also, subject to the provisions of section 41, the tax charged in respect of such supply has been actually paid to the government, either in cash or through utilization of input tax credit admissible in respect of the said supply, and he has furnished the return under section 39. These are the mentioned of the ITC under the work contracts. And also the mentioned outward supply of the contracts. What is the meaning of outward supply? Under section 283, outward supply in relation to a taxable person means supply of goods or services or both, whether by sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal or any other mode made or agreed to be made by such person in the course of furtherance of a business. It is related to the outward supply. And also the following include for computation of taxable supplies for the purpose of availing credit, the zero rated supplies, exempt supplies. Both the zero rated supplies and the exempt supplies are included for computation of taxables. And can provisionally allowed ITC be used for payment of all liabilities? This is no. Provisionally allowed ITC can be used only for the payment of self-assessed input tax in the returns. So also this topic mentioned the input service distributors. It is called as the ISD. ISD means Section 20 of GST Act, Input Service Distributors. Who is an input service distributor? Under Section 2, subsection 61, input service distributor means an office of the supplier of goods or services or both, which receives tax invoices issued under Section 31 towards the receipt of input services and issues a prescribed document for the purpose of distributing the credit of central tax, state tax, integrated tax or union territory tax paid on the said service to a supplier of taxable goods or services, or both having the same permanent account number as that of the said office, called as a input service distributors. What does the turnover used for ISD cover? The turnover for the purpose of ISD means already mentioned the input service distributors, does not include any duty or tax levied under entry 84 of list 1 and entry 51 and 54 of list 2 of the 7th scheduled to the constitutions of GST. Also, ISD requires to file return is required to file monthly return by 30th of the following month. It is very important of the input tax systems. The input service distributors, Section 21 subsection 1 mention the input service distributor shall distribute the credit of central tax as central tax or integrated tax and integrated tax as integrated tax or central tax by way of issue of a document containing the amount of inputs tax credit being distributed in such manner as may be prescribed. These all are the mentioned under the ISD. So the ISD may distribute the CGST credit within the state as CGST only. So that is manner of terms and conditions of GST and also input tax credit, mentioned the input tax credit system. These input tax credit systems also having some other the rules. These rules, chapter 5th of the CGST rules 2017 with effect from 1/7/2017 mention the credit rules. The rules 36 of CGST rules 2017 documentary requirements and conditions for claiming input tax creditum. These are the documents are need to the input tax credit rules. The input tax credit shall be availed by a registered person, including the input service distributor, on the basis of any of the following documents, namely mentioned below: an invoice issued by the supplier of goods or services, or both in accordance with the provisions under section 31. Number 2, an invoice issued in accordance with the provisions under section 31 subsection 3 subsection F, subject to payment of tax. Number 3, A debit note issued by a supplier in accordance with the provisions under section 34. And the fourth one, a bill of entry or any similar documents prescribed under the Customs Act 1962 or rules made thereunder for assessment of integrated tax on inputs. And the last one is an ISD invoice or ISD credit note or any documents issued by an input service distributor in accordance with the provisions of sub rules 1 of rules 54. These all are the documents need to the input tax credit rules. And what are the forms used for the registered person is form GSTR2 by such persons. These rules 37 mention the CGST and rule 38 of CGST. The 38 of CGST claim of credit by a banking company or a financial institutions. The rule of 37 reversal of input tax credit in case of non-payment of considerations. Rules 39 of CGST procedure for distribution of input tax credit by input service distributors. Under Rule 40 mentioned of CGST, manner of claiming credit in special circumstance. Under Rule 41 of CGST, transfer of credit on sale, merger, amalgamation, lease or transfer of a business. Under Rule 42 of CGST, manner of determination of input tax credit in respect of input or input service and reversal thereof. Rule 43 of CGST, Rule 2017, manner of determinations of ITC for capital goods and reversal thereof is certain cases. Rule 44 of CGST, manner of reversal of credit under special circumstance. Under last rule of the GST 45, conditions under registration of in respect of inputs and capital goods sent to the GST and sent to the job worker. These all are the input tax credit rules under section 66 mention the rule of 45, rule of 44, rule of 43, rule of 42 and the rule of 41 and the rule of 40 and the rule of 39 and the rule of 38 and the rule of 39 and the rule of 36 having the chapter 5th of the CGST rules 2017. These rules affect from 1/7/2017 the input tax rules of the CGST.